seconds. Rolling in 10 seconds.
The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold? Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln. I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution. When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. The United States had a spate of terrorist attacks just last week. Well, terrorist attacks and mass killings, shall we say. There were 3. Most of the attention went to the Boston terrorist attack, the one that occurred at the Boston Marathon. And of course, there's a lot of interesting questions about that. Not only what served to radicalize the young immigrant family, including a naturalized American and a permanent resident immigrant, those young men, but also police procedure, legal procedures, and what we can do to prevent terrorist attacks in the future. I understand why the press put a lot of focus on Boston. What I don't understand is why there wasn't more attention made to an explosion at a factory in a small town called West in Texas, where a plant had stored 54,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, which is used for fertilizer, but is also highly explosive, storing much greater quantities of this explosive than were used to rip apart the Oklahoma City federal building by Tim McVeigh in a terrorist attack in the 1990s. What procedures were followed or should have been followed to keep that attack from happening, to keep that explosion from happening? And why wasn't more media attention devoted to it? And also, there's almost no media attention, a little bit, to ricin attacks. Now, when we had anthrax attacks a few months after September 11th, that was big news. But when a person sends a letter to the President of the United States, to a sitting senator, and to a local judge, all laced with ricin, which of course is a biological agent that has no known antidote and would have killed had any of those 3 people been in contact with it, it gets very little news. I want to talk about why that is. We got a lot to talk about. I want to move on and talk about the FAA and sequester and the new bill that serves to put people back on the job at the FAA, air traffic controllers, but takes away from the Airport Improvement Fund. I want to talk about whether Syria has crossed a red line with chemical weapons, and finally end with a note on Jason Collins, the first player in professional sports, he of course is in the National Basketball Association, to come out as gay. So we have a lot on our agenda, Mike. My guest of course is Mike Lane. He is a Republican strategist, the president of Intelligence Strategies. Mike, thanks again for coming here on the Inside Scoop.
Glad to be here, Mark.
Let me start with just the 3 attacks, and you may think it's not appropriate to put Texas in with the other 2. I do, because it seems to me that while the ricin attack and the Boston Marathon attack were certainly intentional acts where people are trying to kill and maim innocent people, what happened in West Texas is almost, to me, just as sinister. Here you have a company that did not follow the regulations necessary to protect us from this incredible explosive, an explosive of far more power, frankly, than anything the Boston bombers did or anything the ricin guy did. At least 15 people are dead. We don't even know how many are dead. Houses were destroyed in a half-mile radius. They found some of the debris 2 miles away. And this small town, even the first responders apparently weren't warned that after the first fire, if they come in to try to help, which they did, there might be a later explosion because of the ammonium nitrate. About 4 were involved in the original fire, so we know, but at least 10, probably more, were people who rushed in to try to help. So my first question for you is, should this have gotten at least, more attention than it did, at least say half as much as the Boston bomber attention in the media? And let's just start there. Let's just start about the media attention.
Well, it should have, yes, Mark, but remember, the media is trying to sell soap in the vernacular. And a terrorist attack is a lot sexier sell than an industrial accident in West Texas.
And also Boston is a media center, and West Texas no one ever heard of prior to this attack, no one outside of Texas.
The media blew it, but it's predictable they would blow it.
Okay. Well, I would hope that, at least in the public debate, we would talk about Texas at least as much as the admittedly sexier story going on in Boston, because it seems to me that industrial accidents are frankly a lot more common than terrorist attacks. And that's why we need regulation to prevent these kinds of things from happening. And ammonium nitrate is a particularly powerful explosive. There was also anhydrous ammonia in there, a gas that can explode. After all, the bomb was strong enough, I call it a bomb, an explosion, was strong enough to set off an earthquake. There was a school and a nursing home nearby. They found debris as far as 2 miles away. This was a very powerful explosion. And as I mentioned, it was more powerful than the exact same weapon, ammonium nitrate, used against Oklahoma City Center. Interestingly, there was a story done where they interviewed the Texas Secretary of State. He said there's 115 of these places across Texas, and he knows where they are, but he's not allowed to inform the public. Apparently, there is a Texas law that says that these places are allowed to store highly explosive material, and it is illegal under Texas law to inform the public. Let me start by saying that I think if you are required to inform the public of a child molester next door, you should also be required to inform the public of highly explosive material next door.
Well, Mark, it shouldn't be highly explosive material the way it's stored. You started off the segment exactly right, is that they stored it apparently in violation of regulations as to how this stuff ought to be taken care of. Now, there's absolutely no excuse for that. There ought to be accountability for that and the damage that they caused and the deaths that they caused. But if they, I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming that if they stored it in compliance with the existing regulations, that would have made it a safe situation.
Well, let me be more specific here. The regulations that we know, we don't know whether or not the canisters, or so to speak, were stored, maybe they were stored properly in the canisters. I don't know that. That hasn't been proven. The only thing that we know from investigation so far is that they didn't report to the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be, you're supposed to give notice to when you have more than 400 pounds of this stuff on your premises. They had 54,000 pounds. In other words, 130 times the legal requirement. They did not inform the Department of Homeland Security. The Environmental Protection Agency was supposed to be informed of the liquid ammonia, and apparently they were so informed. It's weird enough that we have two different agencies of government. One regulates the explosive liquid and one regulates the explosive solid. But more importantly, they didn't have an exit plan that's also required under the law. In other words, you have to have safety procedures. If there's a fire, you have to have a strategy, there were no sprinklers in this place, which seems extraordinary, given that a fire can set off an explosion. We have sprinklers in buildings, in buildings that are not near as combustible to save a few desks. They don't have speakers in a place that could blow up and then harm a nursing home and a school. So it seems to me that, I don't know that it was the storage per se, but definitely failure to follow these regulations, I think, may well have cost a number of lives.
And there ought to be an investigation, and the people who are responsible for that ought to be held accountable for it. I mean, there's just, there's not a justification for failure to comply with the regulations that you just cited. They're all new to me right now, and any other regulations that are violated upon the discovered upon the investigation. It's a no excuse situation. I mean, there's nobody who has the right to defend that kind of activity.
Here's the thing, there is a hodgepodge of regulations here. So there's federal, state, and local regulations. Apparently there's a local regulation that says you can't store this stuff within 3,000 feet, about half a mile from a school. And yet they got a local exception to the zoning laws.
A variance.
A variance, yes, they did. But in this case, an explosive variance, a very dangerous variance that allowed a school and a nursing home to be there. I guess most young kids can run fast. People in nursing home have even more difficulty getting out of the way. To me, it's unspeakable, horror that they would have a nursing home just close to this plant. And it strikes to me that, and I guess I see a larger point here. I see that whenever we liberals try to say regulation is necessary and you can't put a plant that houses a potential explosive next to a school or a nursing home, or that you need to have exit plans or sprinklers or to notify the Department of Homeland Security, we always hear any time that, Republicans say, stop giving us all these regulations. Regulations harm our business. This to me is precisely the kind of regulations that are necessary, if they'd been followed, would have saved lives.
Well, you're exactly right, Mark. I mean, I'm not going to argue with it. I don't think you'll find any Republican who would argue that these specifically are the types of regulations that are not petty, that are not minuscule, that are not ridiculous. These are the ones that do create and enhance worker and community safety, and they ought to be followed. And that's really, I think, where we would find common ground is on those kinds of things.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because it seems to me that also sometimes regulations just need to be modernized. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security didn't exist 15 years ago. And now we have, like I said, the EPA regulates the liquid solids. The Department of Homeland Security regulates, the liquid solids, the liquid explosives. The Department of Homeland Security regulates the explosive solids. We have the Texas Seed and Fertilizer. They were actually in this plant April 5th, I believe, just a couple weeks before the explosion, but they only regulate the safety of the seeds. And we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration hadn't been there since 1986, when apparently they had a number of violations and levied a $30 fine, which is less than most parking tickets I get in D.C. It seems to me sometimes you need to modernize regulations.
Maybe
we shouldn't be against that either.
No. I'm not against modernizing regulations, but maybe we need to wonder why OSHA hasn't been there in almost 30 years.
Well, they don't have a lot of staff. And the reason they gave, interestingly enough, and this is also part of the company's fault, the company was required to check a box to say whether their company posed a risk of fire or explosive hazard. They did not check that box. Obviously, well, that's the company's fault, and they should have.
That's obviously, at a minimum, gross negligence and perhaps criminal negligence. We don't know, but the investigation will find out.
But at least we agree that regulations are often necessary. I said that the same with the BP oil spill, and sadly, I believe these kinds of accidents. I know the one with the. There was one, I believe, a garment factory that had a fire about a few months ago, and the workers couldn't get out. These kinds of regulations are often necessary to protect lives, and I actually think if you add up all the deaths from terrorism, at least since September 11th, and all the deaths from these kind of industrial accidents, it wouldn't surprise me if the deaths from industrial accidents are more in America, and we need to work on that. So hopefully this is something we can work across the aisle.
We do agree that to the extent that this kind of thing can be prevented by requiring compliance with health and safety regulations, we're on the same team.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I want to move on to the other attack that got very little notice. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the ricin attack, because this was a clearly intentional, I would argue, terrorist attack. It was done by a white guy in Mississippi and not a white Muslim naturalized citizen and a white Muslim immigrant, and has gotten very, very little media attention. It's actually an interesting story. Apparently, this guy Dusky was trying to frame this other guy. To me, it's got some sexiness to it. But why is it that this story has gotten so little attention again compared to the other? If you have an idea about that, you want to call in, give your 2 cents, please do so. You can call toll-free 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, or locally 571-749-1160.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
The Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine, talking about the spate of terrorist attacks last week, and also the attack that didn't get much attention, the one in West Texas, where a explosion at a fertilizer plant killed at least 15 people, with at least 10 of them being people, really the most brave, honorable, courageous people of all, the first responders who went in to save lives, who then died in an explosion because, well, ammonium nitrate is highly explosive. Now, it strikes me, Mike, it's really amazing. One of them apparently was the mayor of the town, who's a volunteer firefighter, and may he rest in peace. But it's striking to me that the people in the town didn't realize that this posed a danger. Apparently, this plant served farmers throughout Texas, and I would think most farmers know this stuff is explosive. After all, they work with it all the time. So maybe they didn't know it was stored there or what, but we really have to get to the bottom of this to prevent the, and I hope you'll agree with me that Texas needs to change its law and let people know when this stuff is stored nearby. You have a right to know if a plant is making something that can explode.
I'm flummoxed that they would build something. I don't know what came first, the plant,
or
the school.
The plant came first.
Why
and the
was
schools then,
okay?
right.
Why did the town give a permit to either the nursing home or the school to locate that close?
You know, we don't know the answer to that. Some have speculated that because land was cheaper near the plant, and the town wanted to build the school on cheaper land, and since people don't want to live near a plant, they built the school near that place, which is, if true, would be a pretty damning, I think, reason. Yeah, sure, but we'll put the kids and the old people near the dangerous spot. Yikes, that's a really scary thing.
If once upon a time I was sentenced to a term of officer on a local board of supervisors, and I would have voted against that site permit.
I'm glad to hear that, Mike. I'm glad to hear that. Let me talk about another scary thing. So in Mississippi, apparently two men do not get along. That's, I guess, not surprising. But one of them had trouble with a local judge, and apparently there's child molester charges against him, and he fingered this other guy who's been in and out of jail a few times. Anyway, it all ended up with one of them, probably Mr. Dusky, at least that's what the FBI now believes. Of course, everyone's innocent until proven guilty. But being taken into custody, who sent letters with ricin in it, which is a deadly, deadly biological agent. Just a tiny bit can kill you, and there's no known antidote, unlike anthrax, which actually was sent to those of us working in Congress 10 years ago, but there was an antidote to it. Now, I happen to know that the letter sent to President Obama and the letter sent to Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi were very unlikely to harm them because, thankfully, since the anthrax attacks, we now take all mail that goes to Capitol Hill or the president and check it very carefully. But one of them was to a local magistrate. Frankly, I'm not sure how she avoided maybe she watched her mail because luckily the other letters were found first. But whatever the case, this could have led to her death. And I don't think there's any doubt, at least there's no doubt in my mind, I consider this a terrorist attack. Do you agree?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, because it's an attack on political officials, presumably for some political reason that this
it's a terrorist. I mean, the guy's it's a terrorist attack.
Okay, we agree.
I don't need to go any further.
And yet, it got very, very little. I mean, if you turn on CNN today, you can. It's 24/7 Tsarnaev family. You can talk. You can see the mother. You can see the father. You can get the history of the brothers. You can, and again, that's all interesting stuff. But this minor feud, or that became a major feud between these two Mississippi white men, really got. I mean, I had to look for it. I really had to look hard to find out the details of it. And yet, I just wonder whether the allure of foreignness. ironically, given that one of the surviving suspect actually is an American citizen. He's a naturalized American citizen who grew up here in the state of Massachusetts. Whether that allure leads to more sexy news story than a white guy from Mississippi.
I don't think so, Mark, because we're talking about the failure of the mainstream media here to cover this.
Yes.
The mainstream media would have loved to have a story where a Southern white cracker is involved in something like this. It fits into what they're going for. Regrettably,
why has there been no story then?
Well, because it failed, and failed terrorist attacks just don't garner the kind of coverage.
Okay, well then let me add one more to you. That there's some guy, and we don't even know who's done it yet. I don't think who's going around, and I believe it's in Texas, killing prosecutors. Right, killing prosecutors and judges. That's a terrorist attack. It is ongoing. It involves public officials. And yet, outside of Texas, I don't think I've seen almost anything. And again, I barely know about this. This has been going on for weeks, and they haven't caught the guy.
It was very big in the beginning. I confess to have lost track of it. I think
still ongoing. I believe.
I thought I lost track of it because they caught the guy. If you're telling me they haven't, then
I don't believe they have.
Maybe
they have. But part of the point we don't know is because there's been very little media attention.
Right.
And I believe that there's been deaths here. So
yes,
again, this guy, now admittedly the Boston Marathon's a very public thing, and this is small town Texas, and there's a heck of a lot more media types in Boston, I suppose, than in small towns in Texas. I've been told that they did catch the guy.
Okay.
But again, we got very, very little information on that. They caught the Boston bomber too. And of course, we're getting a whole psychological background into him, all of which is interesting. And we're going to cover the Boston bomber in just a few minutes right here on this show. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. But why, if a guy's going around killing federal prosecutors and judges, isn't that an interesting story?
It is. It's a very interesting story. It deserved more coverage than it got.
I'm told he was a justice of the peace, actually. That's even more interesting.
He was a justice of the peace.
Right. When a judge starts killing people, that's a John Grisham novel, as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, this should be a big story.
Well, he wasn't quite a judge. In Texas, they have these, these less than judges.
Sheriff. I don't know what justice
it doesn't quite rise to the level of a sheriff. You kill 3 people one at a time, or actually a husband and wife, 2, and then 1. It was crowded off by bigger stories. I agree.
It happened even before Boston.
No, I agree. It was underreported. I agree that we needed to know more about it. The guy was a whack job, and he deserves to be tried and convicted if the evidence is there. But it was undercovered, but it was crowded off.
But it occurred before Boston Marathon bombing. I guess my larger point is this. I think that when an attack occurs in a very public place, like the Boston Marathon, again, you could talk about the hundreds that were injured, but of course there are hundreds injured in West Texas. And I happen to think there's something juicy or interesting or more frightening about a Muslim domestic terrorist than a non-Muslim white guy from the South who's also a domestic terrorist.
Actually, you and I have a different perspective on that. I am much more fearful of the lone wolf white guy that's going to be almost impossible to track, impossible to predict.
That's right.
I think that's a much more serious threat than, in
they're
terms
both
of the
serious
number.
threats.
But it's likely with excellent intelligence work and excellent police work, we should be able to stop the majority of the ones coming from overseas. The lone wolf white guy domestically is the one that we have almost no chance of stopping. So it scares me more.
And what's interesting is that I think that the Tsarnaev brothers, for most of, I don't know if you can quantify it, 90% or whatever, but for most, not all intents and purposes, but for most intents and purposes, this is a domestic terrorist job. These 2 guys were raised in the United States. Certainly the younger brother was, by all accounts, he was a decent student. He was a nice guy. He was in the Big Brothers programs. He had lots of friends. None of his friends thought he could be involved in this. He had absolutely no ties to anything. He had only ties to his older brother. His older brother did spend 6 months in Dagestan, where we believe he was radicalized. We'll find out more information now. But one of the reasons it's interesting, you point out that we can often stop these attacks from abroad. First of all, that's terrific, and I'm glad we can do that. So therefore, I guess it shouldn't surprise me.
No, because we know where to focus the intelligence and where to focus the enforcement.
But my point is that maybe the reason why these young men succeeded, where Al-Qaeda has, thank God, failed since September 11th, is because they were basically Americans killing other Americans, and it's a lot easier to do that than for foreign terrorists to come in.
I don't know that I agree with you, Mark. I think they succeeded because we blew it. The intelligence was there. The Soviets gave us the tip.
We call them Russians now.
The Russians, good point.
That's okay.
Living in the past. The Russians gave us the tip, and we did a cursory investigation and dropped the whole thing.
Well,
we blame the fact that there was a misspelled name in the computer. We have all these reasons. The fact is, we got 2 separate tips from the Russians on this. We should have been all over him.
My understanding is we got 1 tip, we checked it out, we asked for more information, and the Russians didn't get back to us.
And then they got back to us independently with a 2nd tip, and then we asked for more information, and they didn't respond to that one either.
Okay.
2 tips from the Russians. It's not, look, the Russians aren't going to give us more information because to do that reveals their intelligence sources.
Well,
They're not going to tell us what their intelligence sources
are. Not entirely trustworthy. I mean, if this had been from the English or the French, the Israelis, the Italians, well, maybe not the Italians, just because they might be negligent. Excuse me, that's horrible. I shouldn't say that. The Canadians, I should say. If this were a tip from a reliable ally, that'd be one thing. But Russia, of course, has fought a brutal campaign against Chechnya. Now, of course, there have been Chechen terrorists that have been brutal as well, including an attack on a school in Moscow. But it would not be surprising if Russia did not give us the most credible tip in the world. I think you can concede that point.
Yeah, I will concede that. But nonetheless, when they give us 2 tips on the same guy, somebody that our computers did pick up that he left the country and went home to Russia, didn't pick him back up when he came back in. There was no follow-up interview. There was
what could we have done? What could we legally have done? They interviewed the guy. He hadn't done anything wrong at that point. He may have had impure thoughts. He may have put something up on his YouTube page. But you have a right to express free speech, including you can even advocate overthrow of the United States government as long as you don't take action to do it.
And we have a right to surveil those people, and that's what we should. That's where we blew it. We didn't surveil him.
Well, we can survey him publicly. We would need a warrant or probable cause under the Fourth Amendment to surveil him in the sense of reading his email or
exactly. I believe that. I believe the information that was out there. That we had 2 separate tips, that he went to Russia for 6 months and nobody could account for his whereabouts or what he did, that he was...
Said he went to visit his parents who were living there.
Well, that he was Chechen Muslim, which is a hotbed of terrorism and violence.
Yes, though he went to Dagestan, not Chechnya, and his parents were living there. I mean, he had a good excuse.
The fact that why didn't we interview his family here? His uncle has been all over the television talking about how
I'm a big fan of Ruslan.
We blew it, Mark. I mean, the
it'd be interesting if we had interviewed the uncle. That's actually a good point because the uncle seems to have known that his nephew was taking up pursuits that he certainly did not approve of. And so maybe we should have interviewed the uncle. I guess it's easy in hindsight to say, aha, this thread should have been studied when, of course, there's a tangle of hundreds of thousands of threads that may lead somewhere and most lead to dead ends. I hope we give our investigative agencies enough time and effort and manpower to look into all of these things. We'll find out exactly whether anyone failed in this regard, and it should be fully investigated on that I agree. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the legalities of the Boston bomber incident, things like the Miranda warnings, and also some of the conduct of police. Now, they've been uniformly praised, and the people of Boston and Watertown definitely gave them applause as they left, and I don't doubt their individual bravery and courage going home to home looking for the terrorists. But were the decisions right? We'll talk about some of the police decisions, which in hindsight, I admit, I guess I question. We'll talk about it when we get back. If you want to call in, it's 888-48-MARK, 888-486-2775.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
A lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800.
Virginia.
So, speaking of what happened in Boston, it's easy to explore the interesting questions of how the young men were radicalized. I'm sure we'll find out a lot more information about that. My concern is, as a lawyer and is an ex-legislative attorney, whether the policy was done right. It's easy to talk and complain about two terrorists. That's actually very easy to do. But I want to make sure that we do the right things when and if, and sadly, I probably should say when, the next terrorist attack occurs. So the police, again, I don't doubt their bravery. They worked very hard under very difficult conditions, and I in no way want to attack or impugn the individual officers who did their job. I want to ask about two decisions that were made. The first has gotten really very little media attention, and that is why people were asked to, quote, secure in place to begin with, unquote. Basically, people were told the suspect was on the loose. They thought he was in Watertown, and they told everybody to stay home all day.
And they shut down the subway.
They shut down everything. They shut down the subway. They shut down Amtrak.
Shut down the entire metropolitan area.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much most of Boston, which is a metropolitan area of about 1 million people, was shut down to catch this guy. Of course, the irony of the situation is the police went door to door. They didn't find him. They finally gave up at 6 o'clock and said, all right, we can't find him. You can go out of your houses now. Guy goes out of his house for a smoke in Watertown, just outside the police perimeter, sees the tarp on his boat flapping, the tape, looks inside, sees the most wanted man in America, immediately calls 911. And good for that man. But it strikes me that sometimes American citizens, ordinary people, can do a better job than the police, and that's not an attack on the police, but there's simply more eyes and ears out there when you inform all of us. I mean, after all, why did the FBI put their names out and give us their pictures? I'm glad they did, because they knew that 300 million of us, one of us recognizes them, whereas not everyone in law enforcement had seen these guys. So I think in hindsight, I can understand sheltering in place maybe at nighttime, having a curfew at night, because that's when, under the cover of darkness, a suspect could get away. But a curfew in the daytime that shuts down a major metropolitan city that in hindsight turns out to have been counterproductive, I just fear that future attacks will actually take American cities down. I mean, if these attacks occur and suddenly New York is shut down for a day, I just wonder if that was the right decision. And of course, we have freedom of movement in America. What's your view on it?
Dead wrong decision.
Okay, you agree with me?
Yeah, I mean, look, they didn't know it at the time. Everybody was scared. We didn't know what we were facing. So it was the wrong decision made under very difficult circumstances. The terrorists want two things. They want us to change our lifestyle, our living pattern. Closing down an entire metropolitan area for a day is exactly the wrong way to go about this. If they really felt the need to do that, they could have just shut down Watertown. You know, why did you shut down the entire metropolitan area? They thought they had him boxed in. They thought they knew where he was. They knew he wasn't in Roxbury or in Southie or something like that.
Although, honestly, if he got into a car, he could have been anywhere in the United States or the East Coast.
So it was the wrong decision, but I'm not going to second guess them. I hope that we don't make that mistake in the future.
That's my main goal, that we not make that mistake in the future. And also, in some sense, it terrorizes people even more. You're kept in your own home. You're living in fear.
You got to get out and live your life and show them that they're not going to change us.
Which is why, for example, we would never shut down the Boston Marathon. It's got to run. It's got to have more people in next year. even though we can't put police along 26 miles. But sometimes individual, I mean, when I think of individual Americans, it was individual Americans who stopped Flight 93 from hitting the Capitol. It was individual Americans who stopped the shoe bomber, wrestled him to the ground on the plane. It was individual Americans who stopped the underwear bomber. So the answer is all of us are a lot more powerful collectively maybe than the authorities give us credit for. Maybe the authorities need to enlist the help of the public more and shut down our freedoms a little bit less. So we agree on that.
Yeah,
We've agreed a lot today. Let me ask you about something else.
We'll find some.
It shocked me to find out, because I watched every minute of it because it was interesting news, that they find him in the boat. The guy calls 911. The police run out to the boat. There's a gun battle, we hear. And then they, before they can secure the area, then they secure the area and they send the robot to get okay. Turns out that the gun battle was not a battle at all. It was a bunch of police shooting at a boat. The suspect, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, at that point was completely unarmed. He had no guns, no explosives. Whatever he did, he left the Mercedes, which had guns and explosives. He left the SUV behind, ran off on foot, hid in a boat. He was an unarmed suspect. To me, that's embarrassing, but even a little bit worse. Obviously, I have no love lost for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, but the idea of police shooting at an unarmed suspect who they didn't pose a threat to them, but to me, the police should never shoot first. They should always shoot second. And they weren't even being shot at. So this to me is something that really needs to be explored, and police procedures, it should never happen that police shoot first.
Well, I don't know what, for lack of a better word, triggered the first bullet downrange on this.
I think one jumpy police officer shot, and then all the others heard the bullets.
That'll happen. When you're in a situation like that where you've got somebody cornered and the first shot rings out, they all ring out.
Right, so I'm not blaming shots 2 through 1,000. But number one, I mean, that guy should lose his job. I mean, I know it's a touchy situation.
If they know who it is, you know.
If they can figure it out. But this is a really dangerous thing where, I mean, who knows what would have happened. The other thing is, even if he was armed and they shoot, he may actually shoot back in self-defense, reasonably so.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the major objective at that point was to take him alive.
Exactly, we need his intelligence.
And so pumping 183 bullets into the boat, or whatever the magic number was contrary to our objective at that particular time.
Right, you can actually hear on the police radio at least some smart sergeant saying, hold your fire, and eventually they did. But obviously, the point was we did want him to give information. And one of the best ways to get information is to interrogate the guy. Of course, there is this thing called the Constitution of the United States, which says very clearly in the Fifth Amendment that you have the right to remain silent. And most Americans agree that the Miranda decision, which says that you should be told of this right, is proper constitutional law. I agree as well. But in this case, something very interesting happened. The police declared the public safety exception to Miranda. Now, the public safety exception to Miranda is one of those watering downs of Miranda that tends to come from the conservative part of the court. And it says that if public safety is in question, you can interrogate someone, not use Miranda, but still use it against him in a court of law. To me, the public safety exception clearly violates the Fifth Amendment. The right answer here is not to declare some public safety exception. The right example here is don't Miranda the guy. Question him all you want, just don't use any of the information he says against him in court. We've got witnesses, we've got videotape. We don't need anything he says ever to be used against him in a court of law. I'm quite convinced we have more than enough to convict this guy and put him away for life, at least. So just don't give him his Miranda rights. But this whole public safety exception, here's what happened. With the public safety exception, he actually was smart not to talk, and I'm sure he was warned that by the public defender that was assigned to him. And rather than say, well, we shouldn't assign public defenders and so forth, to me, get rid of the public safety exception. It actually leads to public not being safe.
Well, Mark, I'm not a lawyer, although I do play one on TV occasionally. The simple fact of the matter is there is enough evidence out there, as you point out, that I could convict this guy.
Anyone.
Okay?
Right.
So I'm with you on this particular thing. It's scary. I thought that we're going to find our first real argument tonight. He should not have been Mirandized. He should have been interrogated at length. I don't know.
But none of it should be used against him in court.
Right. We don't need it in court.
No, exactly. But that's the problem with this exception.
We need to extract the intelligence. We need to find out everything that he knew. I don't think everything he told us was the truth.
Oh, I don't think that. But I'll tell you something else that could have been done. So apparently he wasn't given Miranda by the police. He was given Miranda by this magistrate judge.
Who was who and where did he come from and who sent him?
Well, she, by the way,
all right,
was the ordinary magistrate judge in charge. What happened is this. The prosecutors filed a sealed complaint. According to federal rules of criminal procedure in federal court, the magistrate is required to act without delay, usually according to the rules, that's 1 day, and come, and the procedure is to tell him his rights. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't the magistrate who dropped the ball, but it was the prosecutors or the FBI who dropped the ball. If they wanted to file a special motion with this judge, they should have. But I'll tell you something else they could have done that I think would have been far better. Everyone has a right to an attorney. I want to keep that right. I respect the Constitution. They could have gone to the public defender and said, you know what, screw the public safety exception. We will make a deal with you. If you will allow your client to talk freely and allow us to interrogate freely, we promise that we will not use anything he says against him in court. We'll sign right here. Nothing he says will be used against him in court. We'll prove it all using stuff he did before. And you can even make a better deal, as they often do with plea bargains, and they say, if he gives us stuff that's useful and captures other terrorists, we'll commute his sentence to life imprisonment rather than the death penalty. Something like that, which would be fine with me, that would actually encourage him to speak rather than encourage him to shut up.
Mark, great idea. Ain't going to happen. If I'm the public defender, I'm not taking that deal.
Sure you would.
First of all, I don't...
To save your client's life?
I don't have the authority on behalf of my client to do that.
You'd have to talk to them.
I have to talk to them, right. And I'm going to tell my client not to say anything at that particular point in time. We're not cutting any deals in the first 10 minutes. You know, these are deals you cut days and weeks down the road. It's not something you...
Well, maybe he will talk days and weeks down the road, and maybe we can still... I hope they do cut this deal, because I think we have valuable information to learn from this guy. To me... notwithstanding what he did, he doesn't seem to have been as bad as his brother. He seems to have someone who followed along. I want him in jail for life, but I think if we can get useful information to put away other bad guys, I'd be fine to commuting the death penalty in this particular case.
I would too, but I don't think he's the one that's going to have that information. I think it's his dead brother who has that information. So
well, he may have been told stuff. We'll have to find out.
So unless he coughs up really, really useful information, it's the death penalty for him.
All right, fair enough. Let me ask you about this, and we've got about a minute left in this segment. We're going to go on to the next segment. The British, the French, and the Israelis have all found evidence that while they won't concede it's 100% certain, they say it's virtually certain that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons. President Obama said that was his red line. That if he used red line, if Assad crossed the red line, Assad's already murdered 70,000 plus innocent Syrian people. But this was the red line. This was supposed to be the game changer for President Obama. I hope the president keeps to his word. I'm a little concerned that he wants his 100% proof, and the idea that the United Nations was going to look this up is laughable given the Russian veto.
I'm glad I don't need to say that.
No, you don't. I think we've agreed a lot tonight. But he needs to hold Assad's feet to the fire. Frankly, to me, I would have had no-fly zone before the use of chemical weapons. No question about it. When the President of the United States sets a red line, he's got to obey that red line, lest other people, like Kim Jong-un comes to mind, realize that our red lines are meaningless.
Our credibility is on the line, exactly. And if we allow our credibility to be impugned here over the long run, then not only Kim Jong-un, but the idiot mullahs in Iran as well. You know, what red line is, they're not going to get nuclear weapons? Ha ha.
Yeah, no, we need to take action. Though interesting, there are people for and against action in both parties. This isn't a partisan issue. The toll-free number, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. If you want to call in, we'd like to hear from you. We'll be right back right after this.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged. where teachers have more time to teach. And students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
I'm your host, Mark Levine. I, of course, am a Democrat. My guest, Mike Lane, is Republican, and we've agreed far too often tonight than we usually do. But it's good. Reasonable people can agree, and it shows that people across the party aisles can agree. It seems that in Congress they have a much more difficult time agreeing. Although Democrats and Republicans did come together under a new law that they just signed. Apparently, President Obama can't sign it. I don't know if you heard this. This is the latest, because the bill to allow the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, to bring back the air traffic controllers that they furloughed under the sequester. Apparently, it was written so quickly, parts of it were handwritten, that the bills are not identical. And one of those things the Constitution requires is the bills to be identical, and apparently there's a plural, an S, in one draft of this bill and not in another draft. The one passed by the House does not equal the one passed by the Senate, so now it's going to have to go back. They're going to have to fix it. But in any case, it will be done. But the reason why Congress acted so quickly...
I want to know, I'm sorry, who discovered this stray S in one bill that was not in the other
clerk.
one?
I guarantee it was the clerk. They go through it. I'm sure they put it through a computer program probably today. In the old days, they would, but no, they do that to make sure, and you have to pass identical bills.
Okay.
That's the Constitution.
I understand that.
But Congress acted really quickly. So here's what happened here, and we'll go with the facts, and then you can tell me where you disagree. So we have this sequester, this thing that both Republicans and Democrats say they didn't want. Though I think more Democrats voted not to have it than I think your party voted more for the sequester than my party. But we can let that
less intense opposition. How's that?
There you go. But when it came to the FAA, they don't have that much flexibility because it's required to be across the board cuts, and the Federal Aviation Administration air traffic controller budget pretty much goes to their salaries. Doesn't really go anywhere else. The other things it goes to is things like the facilities there. And so they had to furlough the people. In fact, I saw a fact checker in the Washington Post, people who said they didn't have to furlough the people got free Pinocchios, because they really did under the law. The new bill acts quickly because a lot of American air traffic passengers were upset by having to wait in line, and they wrote their member of Congress angrily. And this bill takes it out of airport improvement. We have to end airport improvement in this country to put these people back on the job. So, okay, air traffic controllers are very important. I agree, they need to be on the job. But I think airport improvement is important too. I think we need more runways. I think we need, that's a good thing too. To me, it just shows the foolishness of this whole sequester idea. Because now the stuff that gets a lot of public attention gets the money, but there's still kids being denied Head Start. There's still money going away from Medicare. There's still all the cuts in this program. We need to end the sequester.
Absolutely not. We found our topic for the night.
Okay.
No, the sequester has turned out to be, for the most part, much ado about nothing. It really has not had the impact that the president screamed and yelled for about 2 weeks on the campaign trail that it was going to have. I don't think, I mean, it's not useful to argue as to whether or not the FAA had the legal authority to shift funds within, because the problem has been resolved. Now, we'll re-resolve it with the errant S taken out or added or something like that.
That'll take a few days, but it'll happen.
But the simple fact of the matter is that airport improvement is something that we can wait a year for. It's not a big deal.
To me, there's a larger issue here. We have severe infrastructure problems in this country. Airports, it's also more fundamental things like bridges. And maybe when the next bridge collapses and unfortunately a number of people die, suddenly people will say, well, wait a minute, why didn't Congress put this in? We have structural reports that come out monthly talking about how we are more deficient now than we've been in decades, that our bridges literally are falling apart, and that we just don't have enough money and then we have roads. And infrastructure is one of those basic things that everyone relies on that allows an economy to grow. Businesses support infrastructure. Republicans and Democrats support infrastructure, but we're robbing ourselves to pay for our ordinary expenses.
The president 4 years ago, got $800 billion in stimulus money. Why didn't we send
Some of it went to infrastructure.
But how much?
A lot of it did not.
How much of it went to Solyndra?
Well,
and how much of it went to
less than 1%?
And how much of it went to Fisker Motors?
I'd say 1/3 went to tax cuts. Because your party loves tax cuts.
So why don't we?
So instead of going to infrastructure.
So why didn't we take the money that went to Solyndra and put that into a bridge that may be needed to? $500 million would pretty much rebuild any bridge in the country.
You've never seen the Big Dig.
That's a tunnel, not a bridge.
I don't think the Wilson Bridge next to my house in Alexandria could have been done for $500 million.
Yeah, I think it was $183 million.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I admit, once you get to those levels of dollars, my eyes glaze over too.
I know, a couple $100 million here and there, it all adds up to real money.
It all adds up. But the point is that infrastructure should be something we all agree on. And one of the things President Obama has tried to do since the stimulus package is spend money only on infrastructure. The Republicans repeatedly shut him down. And this idea that in order to keep air traffic controllers on the job, which I agree is a good thing, that's why it was bipartisan support for this bill, we're now not going to improve any airports in this country. I got to tell you something. In France, in England, in Japan, they're way ahead of us. Their stuff is much more modern than us. They've got high-speed trains going from their city. We don't even have a train going from JFK Airport to Manhattan. I mean, that's shocking. In Europe, in London, in Paris, in Amsterdam, they all have trains going right to their airport. We're being left behind in the modern age, the richest country on earth, because I contend your party is penny wise and pound foolish.
No, we would actually support that kind of spending before some other kinds of spending that go on. But the fact is, Mark, we don't have the money now, and we've got to find ways to.
Sure, we do.
But we've got to find ways. You can't spend your way out of a spending crisis. You have to reduce spending.
It's not a spending crisis. It's a revenue crisis. It's a revenue crisis.
I've not heard that before. A revenue crisis?
It's a revenue crisis.
A spending crisis? Revenues are now 24% of GDP, whereas
far less than they've been.
Historically, they've been 18 to 19%, and we have a revenue crisis?
No, because you're not taking. There's state and local governments that are have much less money because the federal government has to subsidize them.
Well, let's stop that first of all.
In Bill Clinton's era, we had more than enough taxes to cover all of our needs and give us a massive surplus. And it was your party that insisted on these tax cuts for the rich, and they're things that you and I have agreed on.
You got your tax increase on the rich. That's over. It's off the table now.
It's not off the table.
You got your tax increase for the rich.
For people making more than $400,000. We didn't end the hedge fund loophole. We didn't end the jet plane. Business jet, private jet owners loophole.
And you just want to put all these jet manufacturing mechanics out of work and have them receive food stamps and on the unemployment line. That's what you want to do.
People with private jets to pay.
Skilled union machinists, and you want to put them out of jobs.
Rich people with private jets to pay the same taxes that people who don't have private jets pay. I want the same standard. And the hedge fund loophole. You've agreed with me to cut agribusiness subsidies.
Yeah. Between you and I,
corporate welfare
we could probably solve about 20% of the problem between us. So that we'd agree
more than
on
enough
that much.
And you know what? That'd be more than enough to cut the sequester right there. We wouldn't even have to touch entitlements.
Well, the sequester's been a good thing, though.
It's not been a good thing. Ask all those people in airports if it's been a good thing.
According to the poll released by Rasmussen today, only 16% of the American people even know somebody who was inconvenienced in an airport last week.
It's because it only happened for a week. If it happened for a few months, I guarantee you everyone would know about it.
I'm not talking about they themselves being inconvenienced. Only 16% know someone who was inconvenienced in the airport.
16% of Americans know people who traveled last week. But give it a month, give it 3 months, and this would have been a real problem. And that's the issue. A lot of these things are over time.
The FAA,
one other thing in there, by the way.
The FAA has more money, even with the sequester, the FAA has more money than it did last year. So, I think that we can,
Obama, because there was
Obama in his budget. What budget from Obama? But
there was a budget from Obama.
He requested a significant increase in FAA funding for this year, and somehow inexplicably, the Congress doubled down and gave him more than he asked for. So even with the sequester, they have more money to spend this year than they had last year.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that the FAA writ large is not just air traffic controllers. It's things like airplane inspections, which are important. We talked about you got to regulate these things, make sure the maintenance is done. You don't want an airplane blowing up. There's airport
improvements. Or even just falling apart.
Or even just falling apart. The point is that these are all pretty necessary government functions. And I think many conservatives have this idea that government is just wasting money. That may be true of some parts of the Pentagon. It's certainly true about subsidies to agribusinesses and things like that. But most of the time, the government, the FAA, audit the books. If you find waste, cut out the waste, but don't this kind of arbitrary cut out 8% makes no sense.
I think the airport improvement can wait for a year. It's just not going to kill anybody.
You know what? We need airport improvement like we need everything else. I'll tell you one thing we don't need, though, and this is one of the things that got in the bill. There are a number of rural airports that have things like 1 or 2 planes a day. There was a story on one of them in the Washington Post, I believe it was in Texas, or maybe it was Nebraska, it was in the plains, where there were more birds on the runway than planes, because some congressman wants his district to have an airport, even though it's barely used. That's where they were going to cut first. That makes sense. It basically frustrates very few people, unlike delays at John F. Kennedy or National Airport.
In the fixed bill, there were numerous examples of pork. I'm not remembering them all now.
You're right.
I was outraged.
Me too.
If anyone on either side would sponsor an amendment when this goes through again to strip out 100% of the pork projects.
I'll support that.
And then let's get the traffic controllers back to
you
work.
and I together. We should be able to do this. Unfortunately, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell don't listen to us.
Right.
Last thing, Jason Collins became the first professional athlete that's currently an athlete in any one of the major sports in America, football, baseball, basketball, to come out as gay. He is... I think not what a lot of people think of when they think of gay people. He's a 7-foot-tall center. He's African American, and he's a very brave young man, or 34-year-old, I guess, middle-aged basketball years man. But to come out while he's still there. Now, many pro athletes have come out after they've left the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. He's the first to do so. Let me suggest to you that the second's going to come soon, and the third even sooner, and there'll be 5 and 10, and then it'll soon no longer be a news issue at all. Good for Jason Collins for being the first.
Mark, it's not a news issue today. What makes him so narcissistic as to think that I care what he does?
He's the first. But that's the point.
Who cares?
It matters.
Who cares?
Oh, no, it
this
matters.
Guy can do whatever he wants in his private life. It's totally and completely 1,000% irrelevant.
No, the reason why it matters is because people were afraid to say such things. People were afraid in Major League Sports. People were afraid to go into Major League Sports because of harassment. The fact that he was able to say so means some other gay kid is going to feel more comfortable going into sports. It's going to end a lot of the prejudice that's going on in the locker room. It's a major step forward. But I agree with you. In 2-3 years, it'll be old news.
I have been blind to any prejudice in the locker room. Never heard about it.
Oh, come on.
No. Mark, I've never heard about it. I've never heard anybody say it's a problem.
No, it is. It's a major problem, particularly when you have...
I know.
It's a major problem in professional sports, and it's a major problem in high schools and all across the country where you have gay teens that are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than straight teens. We need to end this prejudice. Good for Jason Collins. But I agree with you on this. It may be news today. It shouldn't be news 2, 3, 4 years ago, and that is a good thing.
Mr. Narcissism.
No, it was a good thing.
No.
Good thing. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. If you want more information, go to marklevinetalk.com. Follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk.